All right, so we're undergoing a change here in the state of Michigan in regards to how we sentence juvenile murderers, juvenile lifers, due to the Miller Supreme Court decision and subsequent Michigan court decisions. And if these bills simply codified Miller, we wouldn't be up here speaking against the legislation. What's happening in the state right now is a case by case review of these juvenile murderers. Unfortunately, House Bill 4160 through 4164 go much farther than any current resentencing structure and create laws that are a slap in the face to victims and the families of murdered loved ones, are a slap in the face to communities victimized by these senseless killings, and would allow dangerous psychopaths to go free after 10 years in prison, including Ethan Crumbley, who killed 4 Oxford high school students and would now be parole eligible in 10 years. A couple of main points, because it is very a good descriptor of why I'm against this. Regarding the Ethan Crumbley case, the Oakland County prosecutor has requested life without parole, and due to the heinous nature of this crime, that may actually come into a light. That may be the sentence. The proposed legislation would essentially invalidate the sentence. If this legislation becomes law, the parole board can begin reviewing Ethan's sentence in 10 years and consider his upbringing in his youth, and the parole board could meet with others, with the victims, re-victimizing them again, and could vote to release him soon after. 10 years in prison for the Oxford school shooter is a slap in the face to the victims and the communities that were terrorized. But it's not just the Ethan Crumbley case that would be up for immediate review. Some of the other individuals that you see around me today with pictures who have committed multiple murders or horrific killings would instantly be parole eligible due to the 10-year minimum in this legislation. 10 years in prison or 10 years prison served is not a fair sentence for a juvenile murderer. From a broader perspective, I want to mention that there is other legislation out there that favors the criminal, the convicted criminal, over the victim, over law enforcement, and over safe communities, and I will stand against those pieces of legislation. So I do have Doug Lloyd here, who's the Eaton County prosecutor, will speak to his opposition to the bills.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doug Lloyd. I am the Eaton County prosecutor, and I am the past president of the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan. I, as the Eaton County prosecutor, along with the other 82 prosecutors in the state of Michigan, are opposed to House Bills 4160 through 64. I think it's imperative that if you're going to actually talk about this legislation, that the legislatures, the media, all of you actually get out there and actually speak to your local prosecutor. There is not one prosecutor in this state that wants to lose the discretion that they have to make the determination as what's best for their constituents. When we're talking about these cases, we need to remember, as I sat there today, and as most of you sat there through the hearing today, you kept hearing the word crime. A crime was committed. No, these bills are about murder. That's what we're here for. First-degree murder. We're not here for shoplifting. We're not here for trespassing. We're not here for truancy. We're here for the most serious of crimes that we as prosecutors deal with throughout this state. These bills are going to take away the authority that the prosecutor has and the courts have in making the determination as to what the best sentence is for your individual communities. And as I said, there's not one prosecutor in this state who supports it. So reach out to your local prosecutor, ask them about it, and then reach out to your local prosecutor and ask them to sit down with a victim's family of a murdered victim. See whether they support the bills. You're going to hear that they don't support it either. If we were just talking about codifying Miller, that would be one thing, but we're not. And so, as your Eaton County prosecutor, I cannot support these bills. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. All right, next we have Karen Jackson, whose family member was murdered and did start a Facebook page called Voices of Murder Victims, and Crystal Gogonis, whose brother was killed by a juvenile offender. And they did testify today in committee in opposition to the bills. And Crystal, I do want to point out, was not consulted as the Crime Victims Act required. So this resentencing was a shock and surprise and a re-victimization. So please, if you would.
My name is Karen Jackson. I am a co-victim of murder myself. I represent a group called Voices of Murder Victims, which is comprised primarily of other co-victims of murder. We do not support these bills in any way. My question is, why are we even here with these bills if sentencing is already occurring, has already occurred under the laws that we have? It feels to me like these bills are only here to promote leniency for killers. I don't understand the sense of that. If we do need to codify, then I believe it should be nothing more than what would satisfy the Supreme Court declarations.
Hi, my name is Crystal Bergonis. On October 1st of 2000, my brother Edward Aragon was murdered. My sister Sarah Awetos and myself were stabbed. The doctors told my family that I had less than a 10% chance of survival. Mid-April, I got a phone call after receiving a Facebook post or comment that we needed to contact the department, the prosecutor's office, and we were notified that way of resentencing. Up until this point, we were told that my brother's murderer would be in prison for life without parole. We resentenced on, I believe, May 5th, and he was given a sentence of 35 to 60 years. He has already served 22 and a half years, so he will be released up for parole in 12 and a half years. What I can tell you is that that is nowhere near the amount of time that we need to heal. We're all still healing. It has been such an awful last 22 and a half years to live through this, to try to my own physical and mental health, and then to just be given this call to let us know that now he gets to get out. It's not fair. We don't deserve this. Victims are not looked at. We're not being looked at. We're not being contacted. It's like we have no rights. I do not agree with these bills. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing? In Crystal's case, with these laws, that minimum would go down to 10 years. That means she could have to sit in that courtroom again, watching her brother's killer, the man who stabbed her and her sister, be resentenced to 10 years and, with approval, be released immediately. Thank you.
All right, we have Matt Saxon here from the Michigan Sheriff's Association to speak.
Good morning. I am Matt Saxton. I spent 27 years at Calhoun County Sheriff's Office, the last 8 as the elected sheriff of Calhoun. I retired in 2020 to become the executive director of the Michigan Sheriff's Association, and I currently work for and represent the 83 sheriffs of the state of Michigan. 2 former sheriffs stand behind me today as state reps. I am here today to share our opposition to these bills. As Prosecutor Lloyd mentioned, if all these bills we're doing, we're currently codifying the laws of the land through Miller versus Alabama or People versus Parker here in Michigan, the Michigan sheriffs would support this package of bills. But to make it so lenient, and today during the testimony, what we heard was all about the convicted killer. It wasn't about the surviving family members and crime victims 22 years ago, and it's like it happened to her today. We're talking in a state where we have presumed parole, which means anybody that comes up for a parole hearing is presumed to be granted parole unless there's extenuating circumstance that that would not be granted. If these bills were passed today, murderers would be getting out in 10 years the way the state of Michigan runs parole and the programs we have now. Surviving victims are going to have to come to that parole board and explain why their offender should not be getting out of prison. It's re-traumatizing those surviving victims every 10 years, and it would go on. So if parole's denied in 10 years, they're going to have to come back and explain why their offenders shouldn't be let out of prison. I would ask the legislature to codify Miller, codify the law of the land. Don't make it lenient where we're going to release killers and we're going to create more victims because of it. Thank you.
All right, we'll take some questions. Happy to lead on that. Anybody, questions? Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that was brought up was a substitution that would kind of carve out mass shooters and school shooters and things like that, which would make Ethan Crumbley ineligible for this release. Would you support something like that?
So I'm not going to support anything that goes beyond the court cases that currently exist, like Matt Saxton said. But I would also say, what makes the victims in Oxford different than the victims of these individuals? You know, what makes the victims' families that have to suffer? A mass shooting is a horrendous event, but this individual killed his entire family. Why should he be able to be released early, but Crumbley gets carved out because it's politically toxic to talk about that? I just feel that's insane, and I feel like that's people acknowledging, sponsors acknowledging that this bill package is really toxic and is really anti-victim, and so scrambling to try to find some kind of fix. Yes.
Proponents of the bill have said that life sentences here in Michigan without a chance for redemption is as good as a death penalty. What do you have to say to that?
Well, currently under Miller, everyone is being resentenced who's a juvenile lifer. And there's so many things that get considered when under the Miller test. It's something like 12 or 13 factors. And of the resentenced juvenile lifers, I think only 24 received a full juvenile life term again, and the others were resentenced with a term of years. You understand the difference, right? 25 to 40 versus life in prison. And so I think the process is going, and why we would go farther than the process is beyond me, and it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable that we would go farther and then re-victimize these folks. Any other questions? Okay, and you're welcome, of course, to talk to these folks behind me when we're all done. Thanks for coming today.